Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I've gotten a whole bunch of questions recently from viewers wanting to know what my most weedless bait is under a bunch of different circumstances. So some viewers want me to address what I think the most weedless bait is for fishing around grass, for lily pads. Some have asked about fishing around wood. Others have asked about fishing around docks. So what I thought I would do is put together a video that allowed me to address kind of all of those different pieces of structure with what I think is the most weedless bait that you can throw. Just because a bait is weedless with one type of cover doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be weedless with other types of cover. A bait may come through wood well, but doesn't come through grass well, or a bait may come through lily pads really well, but doesn't really come through rock real well. So it was kind of a hard video to put together, but I definitely have baits that I really prefer under certain circumstances, and that's what I thought I would talk about today. For a lot of you guys at home, you're bank anglers, so you want baits that are very, very weedless because you don't want to lose as many. You don't have the ability to go over to the snag in your boat and retrieve the bait back. So it's important to know what baits are very weedless under these circumstances. And I think in some of these cases, some people may not really have thought about throwing some of the baits that I'm going to recommend for those certain pieces of cover. So that's what we're going to do today. Before I get into that, though, I do want to remind you guys that I've got a membership-based aspect to the channel where I provide additional videos and a monthly live stream where you can ask me all the questions that you want and we'll address them there. It's a good way to have direct interaction with me. So if that interests you, definitely check out the membership portion of my YouTube page. On the home page on a desktop computer, just click the join button at the Matt Steffen Fishing homepage. All the information you need is there. If you're using a mobile device, you need to be using the YouTube app. And at that point, go to my YouTube homepage. And at the top of the screen next to the community tab, there's a membership tab. That'll tell you everything you need to know. But you have to be using the YouTube app if you're on a mobile device. All right, guys, so let's talk about some of these baits and why I think they really excel in terms of being the most weedless under certain circumstances. The first one that I'm going to talk about is, so I'm going to go over all these, and then I have one that I'm going to share with you that is probably the most weedless throughout all of the other baits, and that does really work under all of those circumstances. So the first one I'm going to talk about is grass fishing. Grass fishing for me, when I say grass fishing, I'm talking about all different types of submergent and emergent grass. So your lily pads, your coontail, your milfoil, hydrilla, bulrushes, buggy whips for you guys if you're down south, or cane and all that stuff, whatever you guys want to call it. Tules out west, but I call them bulrushes up north. The best and most weedless bait that you can throw under those circumstances, in my opinion, is an old school Texas rigged plastic worm, like the 7.5-inch Berkeley power worm. One of the best all around worms that you can throw. The reason that your power worm is, or your worm is so good is because it's a very streamlined profile. So it comes through grass really well. And yes, most Texas rigs will work really well under these different types of grass covers. But the reality is your streamlined worm profile will come through everything really well. So if you're fishing around pad stems, the narrow profile of the worm really finds a good path through the stalks. The same thing for your tules or buggy whips. The same thing goes for fishing around milfoil and those types of things. It just comes through really well. Yes, you can throw a bigger, bulkier Texas rig, but you're going to find that it doesn't come through those grass stalks nearly as well as just a straight ribbon tail worm. I've done videos in the past talking about how I think the worm has been completely forgotten about and is probably one of the best all-time fish catching baits that's ever been made. And the Berkeley power worm is definitely one of the #1 worms that's ever been made. So if you're looking for the most weedless bait around any sort of emergent or submergent grass forms, in my opinion, your worm, especially in like a red shad color like this, is absolute dynamite. Uh, if you're going to switch over now to say wood cover is kind of one of those things that no matter what you're using, you potentially could get hung up because you've got different limbs that are crisscrossed. And a lot of times when you get stuck in wood, it's not your bait that's getting stuck, it's the line is sliding in that nook created by the crossing branches. And at that point, your line gets caught. The other real big problem with getting snagged around wood is depending on the type of wood you're fishing and how fresh that piece of wood is. If it's still got bark, the bark will always grab your line. So you could have a bait on, I mean, this happens all the time to me where I'm literally fishing a Texas rig bait using a hitchhiker. So I don't even have a hook on, but I get snagged all the time. It's just one of those things that happens if you're fishing around bark. You know, I was fishing at Pickwick Lake for that last tournament not too long ago and spent a lot of time getting stuck in the cypress tree bark that was out there. It just seemed like it's very snaggy. It grabs your line. But if you're talking about bringing a bait through wood, my absolute favorite for that is a jig. And you can't just pick up any jig, but specifically a jig like this Matt Herron Dirty Jigs flippin' jig that's got a line tie that is perpendicular to the shank of the hook. And the reason for that is when you know, if my hand is the branch, when you pull your jig up to that perpendicular line tie will force the jig up and over versus a parallel one, which when it hits, it would hit nose first and allow the bait to roll to one side. So it's really important to make sure you've got a line tie on your jig that is perpendicular to the shank of the hook. If you have that, it will come through wood way, way better than other jigs. So a jig to me is an absolute must if I'm fishing around wood. Could be standing timber, could be brush piles, could be you know, just a lay down tree, but a jig is an absolute must and is one of the best baits and most weedless baits for getting down inside of that wood and allowing you to get your bait back out of that wood. So if you're not throwing a jig around wood and you're getting hung up a lot, I would definitely recommend switching over to a jig. Next up, we're going to go with dock fishing. And this is one that might surprise some people. One of the best baits for fishing docks is going to be a belly-weighted swim bait. You know, in this case, this is just a hollow belly, Berkeley hollow belly swim bait with a Fusion 19 swim bait hook on the bottom, belly-weighted hook. The whole key here is you've got a weedless presentation already, so you've got your hook buried inside of your bait. It's got, you know, it's skin hooked on the top, but these are extremely versatile baits for fishing around docks because when it's like this and it's this compact, you can skip this bait way up under pontoons, way into different nooks and crannies on the docks, and it swims through your dock posts really well. It swims through any cross beams under the dock really well. If you have cables on the dock, it won't get hung up because it's weedless. So I really got to say that one of the most weedless baits that you can throw when fishing docks, regardless of the type of dock, is a belly-weighted swim bait. It's a really, really good bait for getting bites, and it's a really good bait for not getting hung up under that dock. So if you're not throwing some sort of belly-weighted swim bait on docks, I highly recommend that you give that a try. Next up, we've got our rock. And this is another tough one because rock, again, is one of those things that if your line gets wedged between rocks, you're getting stuck because you're wedging the bait down between rocks and not because the bait itself is getting stuck in the rocks. But there's not anything truly that will allow you to bring your bait back clearly through those rocks and allow you to drag it in the rocks without getting stuck because of that. So one of my favorite things to do is not actually keep my bait on the bottom where I'm dragging it on the rocks. If I can get away with keeping my bait suspended over the rocks and I'm still generating the same bites, I think you're in a better position for a couple of reasons. One, you're not going to get stuck. And two, potentially more importantly, you're not dragging your line up and over rocks, which is fraying your line, which is going to lead to break-offs either on fish or on your baits just when you do get stuck and pull. So if I can generate the same number of bites and get the fish to come off of the rocks, I feel like I'm in a better position. So one of my favorite baits for doing that, if the rocks are in 10 foot of water or less, is to fish a jerkbait. And I know I've talked about it before. The Berkeley Stunna is one of my absolute favorite jerkbaits right now. You can get it in the regular size and the +1 size. And in that case, you can get it down to about 10 feet. So if you're fishing, say, a riprap causeway or a rock flat that's, in 10 foot of water or less, the jerkbait is probably the best bait to draw fish up off the bottom. And therefore, you're not actually going to be dealing with getting snagged. And I realize it's maybe a little bit of a cop-out on this answer, but that's truly how I think. If I can throw a topwater over a shallow rock flat, I'll be doing that too. But I think in more instances than not, throughout pretty much any time of the year, the jerkbait is the best bite for generating those bites. If you're fishing, like I said, if you're fishing down a riprap bank, you're fishing on a dike wall, you're fishing, up here on the Great Lakes on an 8-foot flat that's all rock, covered in zebra mussels, I would rather get the fish to come up and hit this. There's literally no bait that I know of that will not get stuck in rock that is covered in zebra mussels. And not only will you get stuck, you will break off without even knowing you're going to break off. It feels like a toothy critter, like a pike or a muskie, just bit your line and you never even felt the bite because the zebra mussels are that sharp. So it's one of those things. If I can get them to come up and commit to a jerkbait, I'm going to throw a jerkbait on rock and it will be weedless. More weedless than anything else that you throw when it comes to getting snagged in the rocks. That leads me to probably my number one bait for not getting snagged across the board, whether you're fishing rock, docks, wood, weeds, pads, wherever. This is probably the best bait. And it's one of my absolute favorite baits when I go guiding, especially if I've got young kids in the boat, because they sometimes can't cast as well as you would like them to. And you end up in the trees or on the shoreline or in the bushes or wherever, on top of the docks, literally on the roofs of the docks. So one of my favorite baits to give them is a frog. Whatever your favorite topwater, weedless, hollow belly frog is, it's really, really a great bait in terms of its weedlessness. You can bring it through laydowns, you can bring it through pads, you can bring it over any sort of grass. You can throw it, literally, you can skip it up into the bank and work it back out off the bank into the water, and you're not going to get stuck. My favorite frog is the Spro bronzi frog. I think it's got an extremely good hookup, and at the same time, it's probably the most weedless out of all the frogs that are out there. But it's truly a go-to bait for me anytime I'm guiding, not only because it generates awesome strikes and it gets people addicted into fishing, but because it truly is probably the most weedless bait out of all the baits that are out there. You could argue maybe a Texas rig, I could see that, but a Texas rig again, you run into the issues where you're getting your line wedged inside tree branches or inside rocks, and it's just not as weedless as a topwater frog. So yes, all topwaters you could probably say are weedless, but a topwater frog comes through anything. I want you guys, I'll challenge you, if you know of a better weedless bait across the board, throw it in the comment section. But I don't think you can beat a frog. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this answered some of the questions that I've been getting recently about which baits are the most weedless, because I know it's something, there's a lot of people that watch that fish from shore. There's a lot of people that are fishing lakes now that are starting to get thick grass and good pad growth. So finding baits that are effective and weedless is really a good thing to know. So hopefully this helps some of you guys. If it did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned, another video coming out tomorrow.